Sel'ari had never known pain like this before. Her species, the Veyari, were delicate by nature. Their bones were hollow, their skin paper-thin, and their metabolism slow and controlled. Wounds that might bruise a human could shatter a Veyari's skeleton. Their bodies were simply not built to endure. So when the explosion tore through the docking bay, her body did exactly what it was designed to do. It failed. A pressure wave hit first, sending her crashing into a steel bulkhead before she even registered the sound of the blast. Then came the fire, a brief but searing pain along her side before her nerves began to dull. Her vision blurred, and her limbs wouldn't move. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the station's emergency sirens wailing. She could hear voices, faint, hurried, her people. Catastrophic injuries. Veyari physiology won't withstand emergency procedures. There's nothing we can do. Her thoughts swam through a haze of shock. Nothing? Make her comfortable. Her stomach twisted. No, I don't want comfort. I want to live. But her voice wouldn't come. Her body refused to move. The sounds around her began to fade. Then a new voice cut through the noise. You're just gonna let her die. It was sharp, rough, human. Sel'ari barely registered the figure stepping into view, but she felt the sudden tension in the air. Human, one of the Veyari medics said. We appreciate your concern, but her system is too fragile. If we attempt aggressive treatment, her body will... So what? You're just giving up? There was a shuffling of feet. Someone tried to step between him and the medical station, but the human didn't budge. Step aside. Daniel Carter, the medic warned, exasperated now. Our medicine is not like yours. Her body is not like yours. I got that part, he snapped. But you know what? Doesn't matter, because right now, you're wasting time. Sel'ari felt pressure on her arm, something cold pressing into her veins. Then, a shockwave of heat surged through her system. Her sluggish heartbeat kicked into overdrive. Her vision sharpened, snapping into focus as a surge of something unnatural coursed through her. The darkness receded, her senses snapping back too fast, too strong. Her entire body roared to life. She gasped. The medic stumbled backward in shock. Daniel exhaled, satisfied. That's more like it. Sel'ari barely heard him. Her hands twitched. Her limbs, broken, crushed, failing just seconds ago, moved. She wasn't just alive. She was awake. Her body wasn't supposed to work like this. Something felt wrong. No, not wrong. Different. The medics stood frozen, their faces pale with horror. One of them finally found their voice. What did you do? Sel'ari turned her head toward the human. Her own breath sounded too even, too steady. Her voice came out hoarse, uncertain. Human, what did you do to me? Daniel just shrugged. Saved your life. But even he didn't realize what he had just started. Sel'ari was no longer just a Veyari, and soon the entire station would know exactly what that meant. Sel'ari has survived, but her body has changed, and she doesn't know how deep it will go. Sel'ari's body wasn't supposed to feel like this. She wasn't supposed to wake up this fast. She wasn't supposed to move without pain. But as she sat upright, hands gripping the edge of the medical cot, she felt strong. Too strong. The room around her was silent, save for the faint hum of the medical monitors. The Veyari medics had stepped back, their postures stiff. They weren't approaching. They were staring. She glanced down at her hands, skin too smooth, too dense. She curled her fingers, expecting the same fragility she had known all her life. Instead, she felt tension, strength, stability where there shouldn't be any. Her heart was beating too fast. Her breath was coming too easily. Her body felt alive, and that terrified her. She turned to Daniel Carter, the human still standing there, arms crossed, watching her like she was some kind of experiment. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. What did you do to me? Daniel didn't even blink. Saved your life. Her stomach twisted. No, you did something else. This This isn't right. One of the medics finally found his voice. She's stable. But how? That should not have been possible. Another, eyes wide with disbelief, whispered, her system was failing. Her bones should have taken weeks to mend. This is unnatural. Sel'ari barely heard them. Her pulse was too steady. The fire that had been consuming her from the inside just hours ago was gone. And now, she felt different. She wasn't weak. She wasn't fragile. Her gaze snapped back to Daniel. Undo it. That got his attention. He raised an eyebrow. Undo what? Whatever you did. Reverse it. Fix me. He scoffed. You want me to unsave your life? I want my body back. Yeah, well, not much I can do about that. Sel'ari's jaw clenched. Then tell me exactly what you did. Daniel sighed like she was making this more complicated than it needed to be. Adrenaline shot, biogel, and some human first aid. That's it. You were dying, so I fixed it. Her stomach twisted. That's all. That's all. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. That wasn't possible. Veyari biology was delicate, intricate. They didn't heal quickly. Their bodies rejected aggressive medicine. Even their most advanced technology couldn't accelerate healing without serious side effects. And yet, she had gone from dying to standing in a matter of hours. This wasn't just recovery. This was something else. The medics were still watching her, their gazes uneasy. And then she felt it. A dull ache in her stomach. A twisting, gnawing sensation. Hunger. Her breath hitched. That was impossible. The Veyari didn't experience hunger like this. Their metabolism was slow. They could go weeks without eating. It was just how they had evolved. But now, her body demanded fuel. Her hands trembled slightly. No, not from fear. From something primal. The human watched her carefully. You need to eat, don't you? Her head snapped up. Veyari don't... She stopped herself, because clearly they did now. Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, that tracks. She stared at him. Tracks? Your body's adjusting. She bristled. Adjusting to what? To not being fragile anymore. Her breath caught in her throat. No, that wasn't possible. Her hands clenched into fists. Her own body had turned against her. She wasn't just recovering. She was changing. The whispers started immediately. Sel'ari noticed it when she walked into the station's common area. Conversations quieted. Eyes lingered on her for a moment too long. Her people didn't approach. They didn't ask if she was okay. They just watched. She wasn't one of them anymore. She overheard the first conversation in passing. She's not the same. She was supposed to die. Maybe it would have been better if she had. A tightness formed in her chest, but it wasn't from pain. It wasn't from fear. It was anger. They were afraid of her. Her own people were afraid of her, and she didn't know if they were wrong. Daniel, unsurprisingly, wasn't avoiding her. She found him in the maintenance bay, working on a busted drone with a wrench in one hand and an unbothered expression. She sat down across from him. They think I should have died. He didn't look up. Yeah, people hate change. Sel'ari clenched her jaw. I didn't ask for this. I know. He finally set the wrench down, studying her. But you're stuck with it. So what are you gonna do about it? She swallowed. She didn't have an answer. She had spent her entire life moving carefully, avoiding risk. But now, her own people wouldn't even look her in the eye. They think I'm turning human. Daniel smirked. Maybe you are. She hated how easily he said it. I'm Veyari. Then why are you stronger? Faster. Why are you sitting here breathing perfectly fine when you should still be in recovery? She wanted to tell him to shut up. She wanted to argue. But she couldn't, because he was right. The crisis hit before she had time to process it. One moment, the station was running smoothly. The next, the emergency sirens were blaring. A bioweapon attack. Veyari across the station collapsed within seconds. Sel'ari stumbled, expecting to feel her lungs seize, her body fail like the others. But it never happened. She was fine. Her body wasn't affected at all. Her blood ran cold. The attack had been designed to target Veyari biology. But her biology wasn't fully Veyari anymore. She wasn't just different. She was immune. Daniel's voice crackled through the comms. "Sel, if you're still standing, I need you to get to the upper decks now." Her pulse was steady. She was stronger, faster, unaffected by whatever was killing her people, and she had a choice to make. Sel'ari's own people fear what she's becoming, but when an attack leaves them helpless, she is the only one left standing. Now, she must decide what to do with what she's become. Sel'ari stood in the middle of the chaos, her breath steady, her body still functioning while her people collapsed around her. The biological attack had spread fast. The Veyari were fragile, too fragile, and whatever toxin had been released was designed to shut them down within seconds. She should have been dying, but she wasn't. Her fingers curled into fists as she stared at the bodies sprawled across the station floor. She felt her pulse, strong and steady, too steady. Sel. Daniel's voice crackled in her comms again, impatient now. "I need you to move. If you're immune, you're the only one who can do something about this." Her mind was still catching up to reality. Immune, because she wasn't fully Veyari anymore. She had spent her whole life knowing exactly what she was, delicate, cautious, breakable. And now, for the first time, she realized she didn't have an answer. What was she? The moment passed. She forced herself to push aside the fear. This wasn't about her. It was about them. She turned, sprinting toward the medbay. She was fast, faster than she should have been. Her movements were too sharp, too controlled. Her muscles responded like they had been built for this, and she didn't have time to question it. The doors hissed open, revealing a team of medical staff scrambling in confusion. Some of the Veyari were still barely conscious, struggling to move, while others lay completely still. The medics worked frantically, but nothing was stabilizing them. The lead medic turned, his face tense, then froze. The entire room stared at her. The unspoken question hung thick in the air. "Why are you still standing?" She ignored them. "Do you have an antidote?" The medic hesitated. His gaze flickered between her and the unconscious Veyari before answering. We don't even know what the toxin is yet. There's no time to synthesize anything." Her stomach twisted. No antidote, no solution. But there was one difference between her and the others. Her body had fought back. Her gaze dropped to her own hands. She had spent the last few days feeling wrong, as if something inside her had been rewired. Now she understood. It wasn't just adrenaline. It wasn't just recovery. Her biology had changed. She turned back to the medic. "You don't need to synthesize an antidote." His brow furrowed. "What?" She took a slow breath. This was insane. "Extract a sample from me. If my body isn't affected, then the answer is already in my system." The medic paled. "Sel'ari, we don't even understand what's happening to you. You could be permanently altered. That already happened." Her voice was firm. "You can either argue with me, or you can save them." A long silence. Then, the medic moved. The injection process was fast, clinical. Sel'ari barely flinched as the device pierced her skin, drawing a sample of blood. The same blood that wasn't supposed to be this strong. Minutes passed in heavy silence as the medics worked to break down its components, scanning for something. Anything. That could fight back against the bioweapon. Daniel appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. He wasn't surprised. "Told you it wasn't just first aid." She wasn't in the mood for his smugness. She exhaled. "If this works, don't talk to me for a week." "Deal." The medics whispered to each other, scrolling through the test results. Then one of them turned, his expression stunned. "It's neutralizing the toxin." A flicker of something unspoken passed through the room. Hope. The antidote was synthesized in record time. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about this situation was. But it worked. And as the first of the Veyari started waking, Sel'ari finally let herself breathe. She had saved them. But she wasn't one of them anymore. The recovery efforts lasted hours. The station, once filled with panic and death, slowly returned to stability. But she could feel it, the way the others looked at her, not with gratitude, with fear. She heard the whispers. She's not one of us. She's something else now. She should have died. Every breath felt heavier. Even as they stood, alive because of her, they still saw her as wrong. Daniel stood beside her, watching the medics move through the halls. She crossed her arms. Say something obnoxious, so I can focus on hating you instead of them. You make this look good, she sighed. I hate you. No, you don't. Her gaze darkened. They don't want me here anymore. Daniel studied her for a moment. Then he said something she didn't expect. So what? She blinked. So what? You saved them, didn't you? Her throat tightened. That's not the point. They think I'm a what? Something stronger? Something different? She didn't answer. He smirked. Sel, I know you're freaking out about this, but let me ask you something. Do you feel weaker? She scowled. No. Slower. Obviously not. Then what's the problem? Her hands curled into fists. She didn't want to admit it. That some part of her wasn't just afraid. She was curious. Later, as the station settled into a tense quiet, a Veyari scientist approached her. We've been running simulations. There might be a way to reverse the effects in your system, to return you to what you were before. Sel'ari's breath caught. She should have said yes. She should have agreed immediately. But she hesitated. She looked at her own hands. She had never felt strong before, never felt resilient. Daniel was leaning against a nearby console, watching her reaction with that stupid knowing smirk. You really want to go back? She swallowed hard. She didn't answer right away, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she wanted to. Sel'ari has saved her people, but at the cost of her own identity. Now, she has a choice. Reverse what's happened to her, or embrace the strength she never knew she had. Sel'ari's hands remained still in her lap as the scientist's words settled in. There might be a way to reverse the effects in your system, to return you to what you were before. She should have said yes, but she hesitated, because for the first time in her life, she didn't feel weak. She had spent her entire existence moving carefully, avoiding risks, knowing a single wrong step could break her. Now, she was something else, stronger, faster, resilient in ways no Veyari should be. And she didn't know if she wanted to give that up. Daniel, lounging nearby, smirked. You really want to go back? She swallowed hard, unsure for the first time. She didn't get the chance to answer. The alarms blared through the station. A sudden jolt shook the ground beneath her, knocking loose equipment from the walls. A second later, the voice of the station's security AI crackled through the intercom. Emergency alert. Biological contamination detected. Initiating lockdown. Sel'ari was already moving, pushing past the scientist as Daniel pulled out his communicator. Tell me this isn't another gas attack, he muttered. She didn't need an answer. The heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor told her everything. The toxin spread faster than before. Medical personnel collapsed in the hallway outside, their fragile Veyari physiology shutting down in seconds. The emergency response teams were already too late. Sel'ari wasn't affected. Her breath came steady. Her heartbeat remained strong. The others were dying, but she stood there, untouched, immune. Daniel looked at her. They both knew why. This toxin had been designed to target the Veyari. But Sel'ari wasn't just Veyari anymore. The medical bay descended into panic. Veyari who had survived the last attack were now dropping one by one. She turned to the scientist, the one who had just offered her a way to fix herself. He was on his knees, gasping for air. He wouldn't last another minute. Sel'ari clenched her fists. She could stand there and do nothing. Let them prove themselves right. Let them die thinking she had become something unnatural. Or she could act. She grabbed the scientist by the shoulders, hauling him onto a medical cot before checking his vitals. The other doctors were already struggling to stay conscious. They wouldn't be able to administer treatment. She would. Daniel grabbed an oxygen mask from the emergency supply rack and tossed it to her. "You good?" he asked. "No," she said, strapping the mask onto the scientist. "But I don't have time to care." Sel'ari had never moved like this before. Her body reacted on instinct, running from one patient to the next, setting up oxygen stabilizers, adjusting biogel dispensers. Every moment counted. But it wasn't enough. This toxin was worse than the last one. The symptoms were faster, more aggressive. The medical equipment wouldn't be able to keep them alive long enough. "Sel," Daniel called, voice urgent. She barely looked up. "Busy." "No, you need to see this." She turned and froze. Through the observation window, a ship loomed outside the station, a Zerth war cruiser, the same species that had attacked the Veyari before. Sel'ari's breath caught. "They're watching." Daniel's expression darkened. "More like making sure it works." Her pulse thundered in her ears. The Zerth had planned this. The bioweapon attack wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. It was a test. And if the Veyari died here, this was only the beginning. The medical bay wouldn't hold. Sel'ari needed to get to the filtration system. If she could inject an override, she could shut down the toxin before it spread further. She moved before Daniel could stop her, sprinting through the failing corridors. Her body adjusted to every sharp turn, every impact. There was no hesitation in her steps, no weakness. And then she collided directly into a Zerth soldier. He had already boarded. His armor was thick, his weapon already raised. She should have been dead. Instead, she moved faster than he could react. Her instincts took over, her foot sweeping his legs out from under him before she even realized what she was doing. The rifle clattered to the ground. The soldier barely had time to choke out a word before her fist slammed into his jaw. He didn't get back up. Sel'ari stared down at him. She had never fought like that before. That wasn't Veyari reflexes. That was something else, and it had saved her life. She reached the control panel and forced the override. The system hissed, releasing the counteragent. The toxin was neutralized. The Veyari would live, but the Zerth warship was still outside. And they had seen everything. Sel'ari's communicator crackled. "Sel." Daniel's voice was steady. "You did it." She looked back at the unconscious soldier at her feet. She thought about the way her body had reacted, the way she had survived when no one else could. "Yeah," she said softly. "I did." But she wasn't sure if that was a victory or something much worse. Sel'ari has saved her people again, but now the Zerth know what she's capable of. She isn't just immune, she is something new. Sel'ari stood in the wreckage of what had once been the station's secure medical wing. The bioweapon had been neutralized, the surviving Veyari were stabilizing, and the Zerth warship had left without firing a shot. But she knew what that meant. They weren't retreating. They were reporting. The Zerth had seen her fight. They had seen her survive what should have killed her. They had seen what she had become. And now, they would tell the rest of the galaxy. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a threat. The whispers among the Veyari hadn't stopped. If anything, they had only grown worse. She saw it in their eyes when she walked through the corridors. Hesitation, uncertainty, fear. They had lived because of her, and yet they still didn't know if she was one of them anymore. A scientist approached her, hesitant, as if speaking to something dangerous. "We've studied your readings. If you want, we can begin the process of reversing the changes. We may be able to restore you completely." The words sent a strange pang through her chest. Restore, like she was broken. Daniel, who had been leaning against the wall nearby, scoffed. "Yeah, 'cause that worked out so well last time." The scientist ignored him. The choice is yours, of course. Sel'ari swallowed. It should have been an easy decision, but she hesitated. She met Daniel at the upper decks later that evening, staring out of the station's viewing window. The stars stretched endlessly before them, an infinite sky of possibilities. She didn't turn when he walked up beside her. "You're thinking about it?" It wasn't a question. She sighed. "My people see me as something unnatural. Maybe they're right. Or maybe you're the only reason they're still breathing." She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "You don't understand. I don't know what I am anymore. I move differently. I react differently. I feel—" She stopped herself. Daniel watched her carefully. "You feel alive?" She pressed her lips together. "I was alive before." "No," he said simply. "You were surviving. There's a difference." She didn't answer, because deep down, she knew he was right. The next morning, she made her decision. She walked past the scientist without stopping. She didn't ask about reversing anything. She didn't ask about going back. Instead, she went straight to Daniel. She found him in the maintenance bay, fixing something with his usual nonchalance. He raised an eyebrow when he saw her. "So, you make up your mind?" She took a deep breath, flexing her fingers, feeling the strength in them. "Teach me." A slow smirk spread across his face. "Yeah," he said, tossing her a spare wrench. "I can do that." She caught it easily. Too easily. She wasn't just a Veyari anymore. She was something new. And for the first time in her life, she was okay with that. Sel'ari has made her choice. She won't go back. Instead, she will embrace what she has become. The galaxy may not be ready for her, but she is ready for it.